My apologies, I got carried away watching my ospreys. I'm trying to photograph them.
Okay, this is the, what is it, May 7th meeting, the Mashpee Sewer Commission, May 7, 2015. I call the meeting to order. First order of business is approval of the April 16th, 2015 minutes. I've been through them, made my comments.
May 7th, okay.
They're attached to the back here.
I've had a chance to look at them. Jeff, you've done that, right?
I got them. I don't know if I, did any comments?
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes of April 16th.
Okay, is there a second?
Second.
Make changes, because I said, yeah.
Okay, sounds like we're all set, Jeff?
So,
Okay,
Seconded it.
Joe seconded it. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye, that's a roll call vote. Joe, Tom?
Aye.
All right, first order of business is the review and approval of our final plan, EIR, in response to the Secretary of Environmental Affairs. Jeff Gregg, our consultant, is going to do us a PowerPoint presentation to tell us what the final plan looks like.
all set?
Yep.
Okey-doke. Good evening. My name is Jeff Gregg. I'm the project manager from GHD, working on this project with the committee. And tonight I'm going to be going over the presentation on the final recommended plan and impact report. What I'd like to do is give a brief overview of what I'm going to be talking about tonight, a little bit about the planning areas, background of the project, the outline of what the report's going to look like, an overview of the implementation schedule that we've talked about as part of the draft and now as part of the final, an overview of the estimated costs, and then a little bit about the short and long-term monitoring and modeling and next steps. So as many of you are aware, this project encompasses the entire town of Mashpee and then portions of Pompanesett Bay and Waquoit Bay East that fall into the towns of Sandwich, Barnstable, and Falmouth. So it's depicted here in the figure with the red line that indicates our planning area. And so this is a figure that we've carried for a number of different things, just to get people back into tied into where our project actually involves. I've reviewed this as well, but just as an update for those that aren't familiar, this project has been a long-standing project, started for GHD and Stearns & Wheeler back in 99-2000. It's a state revolving fund funded project. As part of the process, we started the MEPA and Cape Cod Commission DRI joint review process very early. We started back in 2001 when we filed our ENF. Then we submitted subsequent reports in 2007 for the needs assessment, technology screening, a notice of project change because there have been some pauses in the project. Then in 2008 we came up with our first sort of round of alternative scenarios, and it was sort of the forerunner to our alternative screening analysis report. We had some model runs run by MEP and got the results in 2012. And then we issued our draft alternative screening in April of 2013. Our final that summer. Our draft of the recommended plan just last June. And now we're looking to submit the final recommended plan this year, right? Pretty much almost a year after we submitted the draft. As part of this project, we have done public outreach in addition to the monthly or more sewer commission meetings that we've had to discuss the project and the various different presentations. We developed a kiosk that's out in the Mashpee Town Hall front area. We've created a web page that we put our documents, the minutes from the meetings, the reports, things of that nature. We've done a flyer for the project the committee and the team has participated with the other communities as part of their CACs, their water quality management committees. We've had joint meetings. We've had other presentations. They've been involved in the 208. So as part of the plan, we need to just talk about those things as well and remind people that, we have been trying to do this and get the word out and get the information out to the various different stakeholders. The recommended plan outline itself is very similar to the draft plan. The two major differences are it's only 10 chapters instead of 11, and we created this Chapter 2, which is a summary of the 208 planning. One of the comments that we had received was, please summarize the 208 planning efforts. And so what Chapter 2 does for our report is it talks about the 208, but it puts in perspective of all the planning efforts that the town of Mashpee has done and how they match up well with the efforts of the 208 planning and what the 208 planning goals are. That document for the 208 is actually getting submitted in June and should be finally approved, I believe, in September is what they're looking for. The other change, we've combined a couple of the previous chapters. So our Chapter 4 now is the framework and summary of evaluations that were discussed in the draft. Chapter 5 is just a repeat of the findings of the draft recommended plan. So people can see this is what we had presented as part of the draft. And then Chapter 6 talks about the changes and the modifications so you can see the difference between the two. Then we do evaluations of the environmental evaluations in Chapter 7. Chapter 8 is the draft Section 61 findings and mitigation measures, which really deals with the permitting aspects of the project. It sets out here are the various different permitting aspects that your project's going to need to deal with, and here are some of the mitigation measures. Because a project like this is such a large base project that goes over many different years, it's not like a defined, we're building a school or a shopping center or something else that's more localized. So it's a broader perspective on that, and so that's the way that section's developed. Chapter 9, again, is the phasing and implementation. It talks about how we're looking to roll out the plan and how it's going to be divided, how we've divided it up into phases, and then how the town will then move forward with that. And then Chapter 10, the framework for the adaptive management, which gets into the monitoring and modeling. But ultimately, as part of the DRI process, the Cape Cod Commission will work with the management agency in developing an actual adaptive management plan that'll go on for the project. So this just sets the framework for what that plan might look like. As we've talked about in past presentations and meetings, we broke the various different components into 3 general categories: source removal, direct environmental mitigation, and land management strategies. Source removal is a focus on more of the traditional methods, hard infrastructure, your on-site systems, your best management practices for stormwater improvements, your fertilizer management, because you're tackling the nitrogen removal at essentially the source. Direct environmental mitigation are those things where as the groundwater is reaching its sensitive receptors like the embayments or ponds, that's where you'll see things like our shellfish aquaculture component of our project and other adaptive approaches. In our plan, we focus on the shellfish. We talk about there are other pilot projects out there, and the 208 has identified other methods as well, and those would generally, the softer solutions kind of fall into that direct environmental mitigation. And one of the things I forgot to include on here was actually the flushing study that we were talking about for the Quashnet-Moonacus River. And then land management strategies is really, well, how is each town going to look at growth and development and their recharge sites and things of that nature. So that's how sort of the plan, the plan components have been framed out that way, and then we build our actual recommended plan. So in taking the recommended plan and sort of boiling it down, the major components of the plan really are primarily, you have shellfish, aquaculture, propagation, restoration. The reason I use all three terms is because we seem to use a bunch of these different things, but we have a bunch of them going on. So we have a shellfish plan, and some of it's aquaculture, some of it's just propagation, some of it's actually the restoration of shellfish areas. We've looked at Site 4, which is the site that's adjacent to the transfer station, as our initial service area to serve around Route 28 and things like that in the Mashpee River watershed, which is one of the ones that we couldn't, or we haven't presumed that we would address completely with shellfish. The Quashnet-Municus River evaluation, looking at possible soft solutions there. That's the evaluation that would lead to presumably improved flushing, which may have an impact there. And then Joint Base Cape Cod falls into that Quashnet-Municus River area because we couldn't be addressing that with shellfish. So depending on what the flushing analysis says and the findings of how Joint Base Cape Cod might work in the plan, the fallback to that would be using the back road or the high school sites in combination to deal with some of those issues in that watershed. And then you have long-term monitoring, modeling, and reporting of water quality. Then, in dealing with the balance of TMDL compliance, it really does come down to the shellfish performance. So the plan is built with two paths. There's a path that starts with the shellfish and has some traditional infrastructure and fertilizer management and stormwater best management practices. But then, depending on what the results are in the embayments, if things aren't proceeding the way that the towns had hoped in terms of seeing that performance in the embayments, then we have the fallback of a more traditional approach to deal with TMDL compliance. So in the report, there's the talk with shellfish and without shellfish. And granted, the reality is the program is going to be probably somewhere in between. And where in between, we don't really know, and that's the whole point of doing the adaptive management part of it and monitoring and modeling on future phases. So if shellfish isn't doing what we expect, we have potential new facilities at Site 6, which is down by the new fire station down in the southern part of town. We have recharge sites, possible expansion and use of the golf courses at New Seabury and Willow Bend. We have improvements and modifications and performance at the various existing wastewater treatment facilities, again, depending on which watershed they fall into. The continued coordination with the neighboring communities of Sandwich, Falmouth, and Barnstable. We are maintaining a certain level of existing on-site systems. And then the Cape Cod Commission 208 planning and adaptive management approach is out there as well in terms of other programs that may come out and available as you're going through this planning period. In terms of the shellfish, what this table is showing is the various different watersheds on the left-hand column, and then what it presents is it presents the MEP's estimated attenuated nitrogen load to be removed from those various different embayments. What we've estimated that the shellfish in metric tons per year would be removing, what type of shellfish would be in those, and then what rough percentage of the removal of that existing MEP/TMDL load we're talking about. So the important things to point out is Mashpee River, Shoestring Bay were both only estimated at this point to be looking at a 50% removal. We talk about the fact that there is the possibility that we'll actually get better removal in both of those, but for the purposes of the report, we've started with the 50% as our assumption. The Quashnet River wasn't identified as a suitable habitat for shellfish restoration, and therefore that's why it's carried along as 0, and we're looking at other solutions in that watershed. In terms of the figures, And I apologize in the room, it's a little hard to see with the lights, but these are some draft figures that
Great.
Rick York has graciously provided to us that show some of these quahog restoration areas. So on the left-hand side, you're looking at the Woquoit Bay side, so Hamlin Pond, Yehu Pond, the Great River, Little River, those areas. So the area shaded in yellow are the proposed acreages of habitat that's available for shellfish restoration in those areas, primarily quahogs. And then on the right-hand side, we're talking the Pompanesett Bay side, and we're down by Aquay Bay and Pompanesett Creek. So again, the shaded areas of those acreages. And these figures will actually be updated because I know there's some minor modifications that Rick and I were discussing that we'll incorporate into the report to actually add some additional bottom areas into these maps. On the next figure, this is upper part of Pompanesett Bay. So on the left-hand side is the Mashpee River, and it's a little hard to see with the red polka dots and red hatching. But those are areas that are either existing oyster culture, aquaculture farms, propagation areas, and reefs. And then on the right-hand side is the Shoestring Bay area. And although it's a little hard to pick out in the middle of the river or in the water body, as you're moving up Shoestring Bay, the green represents area available in the town of Barnstable, their shellfish areas, and then these red areas are Mashpee areas of shellfish bottom. And what you can see here is that the reality is this is a great opportunity for both communities to be able to support a shellfish aquaculture program between the two of them and really work to help clean up that part of the embayment. In terms of the implementation schedule, we broke it into 3 general categories. So the first of which is short-term initiatives, which is essentially the now. It's what we're doing now and the next year or whatever to kind of transition us from the end of this planning process into more structured, hard implementation phases. Then phase 1 is really the focus of the plan, the first 5 years, because it's going to set the framework, set the footing, and allow the town of Mashpee to get in there, get its shellfish going, and get some hard infrastructure in place, and build up the monitoring and modeling program that will be used, and start seeing some results. That's the plan. That's the goal. And then after that, it's long-term implementation and adaptive management. And again, it's all predicated on the performance of how the shellfish do and in which embayment they're doing it in, such that if we have various different phases that have to shift around because maybe there's another town project, a road restoration, a gas main installation, or something else, or there's shellfish that are doing better in one watershed but not as great in some others, it gives you the flexibility to kind of move some of your puzzle pieces around to start really targeting your needs. So the plan is built on 5 major phases, but implementation itself is really going to be in much smaller chunks. So you may do one project that's a couple years here and another couple here, and just because it says from year 2017 to 2021 doesn't mean it has to be right in that 5-year period. It was a way for us to kind of break it out into more palatable chunks without having to map out 26 years worth of planning. So in the short-term initiatives, I talked about some of these things, completing the plan and getting it submitted, the town building its management structure, whether it's through the town, through a district, or some combination. The shellfish aquaculture propagation and restoration, some of those efforts are on now, and then depending on funding, we'll presume how fast that you'll be able to then really expand those areas. the continued ownership discussions of the existing facilities, any private wastewater treatment facility evaluations as they're coming into play with regards to how we'd connect to them and how much capacity is available now, and plans for the future. So those things would be happening. And the development of memorandums of understanding and intermunicipal agreements. As the Cape Cod Commission's working through its 208 planning process, that's a lot of what they're talking about. They're designating management agencies, presumably it'll be towns, and then those towns will work together in watersheds, and there'll be potentially watershed permits. And as part of all those things, that's where you would have the opportunity for these regional memorandums of understanding and IMAs. And it will help influence and determine the focus of your long-term phasing. And then the continued fertilizer and stormwater best management practices. In the phasing, so we've proposed a phasing map, and it's color-coded. The red represents the pink, which is essentially these areas in the Mashpee River watershed. So I apologize for those on TV can't see my pointer, but in the middle of the map is essentially Mashpee Commons, and so this is just east and sort of north and south of 28 as kind of the target areas for Phase 1, in addition to the Moonicus River evaluation to see what the findings are there, shellfish aquaculture in the various different bays. And we've also, although the Mashpee Commons is highlighted in pink, they're going through an upgrade right now. But the colors associated with the treatment facilities were typically in terms of their phases of their upgrades, when they would be doing upgrades and things of that nature with regards to their facilities as their facilities reach certain ages. Yes, Tom?
Years are off by one now. I can have to update the
Shoot.
years.
Sorry, and so my years are off by one because we shifted everything a year, and I forgot to shift this from the draft slide, so I apologize. And then Phase 2 kind of deals a lot with sort of the center of town. It gets back into hopefully dealing with whatever the solution is going to be over in the Quashnet River watershed, some areas around south of north of Mashpee Commons, some of the sandwich areas that go and impact the Quashnet River that come down through Johns Pond and Ashumet Pond. Phase 3 is really just targeting dealing with Pompanesett Bay. Phase 4 starts focusing in, if the shellfish aren't doing what we need them to do, in the Quashnet River evaluation as well. It starts dealing with sort of the lower portions of the Wacoit Bay East watersheds, and then also it works its way back up into some of the Pompanesett Bay stuff. And then 5 is really, because it's so far out, it's really it's the cleanup phase. It's kind of if that's where you're going to be implementing whatever else it takes you to kind of meet those TMDLs. And all this is developed, it's outlined in the report. So this is basically some summarization of that in Chapter 9. So Phase 1, as I talked about, as needed, notice of project change may need to be issued, or some response to the development of regional impact, the DRI, depending on what their requirements are from the Cape Cod Commission. The shellfish program, talking about expanding in the Pompanesett Bay, and I'm just talking Pompanesett Bay in general, so that's all the embayments that we talked about before, and then new shellfish restorations in Yehu Pond, Hamlin Pond, Little River, those areas. Looking at a small initial phase of the Site 4 wastewater treatment facility recharge in the service area, as I showed you in that pink. Possible sewer extension to the Wampanoag Village facility to serve some of the areas that are north of that facility and the neighborhoods adjacent to it. And that would be part of the a study as well to make sure that those areas can be served the way we'd like them to be served. And then some feasibility studies with regards to Mashpee Commons once they've gotten their new facility up and completed, and then the Quashnet-Moonicus River flushing evaluation. And so as part of the estimated Phase 1 costs, we looked at, well, how this breaks out. So these are capital costs for that first piece. And so there's a shellfish component, the collection systems, treatment system, and recharge. This doesn't get into the cost for those additional studies and evaluations and things of that nature. This is sort of the hard infrastructure and the shellfish component. And the breakdown of that shellfish is, we talked about this during the draft. Again, it breaks out a bit in this form. And Rick, I apologize, I changed Pompanesett Bay to Pompanesett Creek based on our discussion, so I presume that these dollar values are proper. Okay. And so this is sort of a general breakout of the funding mechanism that Rick had pulled together for those various different areas to get those started. And then the worst case scenario would be these would be reoccurring costs each year if these systems don't become self-sustaining. So the goal is that they become self-sustaining and you're not carrying $1.5 million a year every year for shellfish. But we carried this cost in the plan just as a conservative measure because it's still less expensive than some of the other measures that if the shellfish are doing it but we're having trouble sustaining them to the levels we want. So in terms of the operation and maintenance, you can see that 1.5 annual cost there, collection system, treatment. Again, this is just for the Phase 1 for an estimated O&M cost per year. Then what we did is we took those and created present worth values of those costs, added to the capital costs, really for comparison purposes. So the reason we deal in present worth is we bring everything back to year one. So it's not that you're paying $78 million in year one. It's an idea so that we can compare it to other scenarios and bring everything back to the same year. But essentially, the total present worth is based on a 20-year planning period at 3% interest. The reality is, for any of these facilities, you're going to be carrying operation and maintenance for the life of the project, which is for the life of the town, because you have to maintain these facilities in order to maintain your water bodies, unless something else changes, i.e. the source is reduced. So as we continue through the schedule, what I've done is I really boiled down the next few phases. So some of the things that are repetitive on each one are things like filing notices of project change. So as you get to each 5-year period or in between, you may find that, well, things are going really, really well in the Mashpee River, but things are going a little slower in Aquay Bay, and so we've decided that we're going to pare down what we were going to do in Mashpee River because we're in really good shape, but we may want to advance something that's in a later phase into an earlier phase or vice versa. So that's the idea of the notice of project changes. Or if there's a pilot project that has identified a perfect opportunity to take a new technology or facility and implement that in a different way, or send our collected wastewater to a different facility, that's the opportunity where you deal with that with a notice of project change. You've got a plan, you're still dealing with it, but you'd issue that to say, hey, well, the change of our plan scope is now this. We're still dealing with the issue, but we're just managing it in a different mechanism. You're obviously going to be continuing to monitor water quality data. There is existing data, there's existing reports for those. What will come out of the next really in working with the Cape Cod Commission and DEP and others with regards to the permits and the DRI process, they're really going to nail down what they're going to be looking for that water quality data and collection and how that's going to look. And then as part of the plan, you'll have to do compliance reporting. So presumably as part of your 5-year permit, you will have a 5-year compliance report that'll say, yes, we've done these steps, this, and this. We've seen these kinds of improvements. The water quality has shown this, and this is what our next step is for the next piece. And again, the following phases will all depend on, the shellfish performance and other soft solution performances. So in the second phase, because in order to meet TMDL compliance, you'd still need to deal with the Quashnet River watershed, presuming that the flushing evaluation doesn't lead to what to the full restoration. Presumably, the Joint Base Cape Cod facility would be part of that, and also additional extensions around the Mashpee Commons area to deal with those areas in the Mashpee River. And then if propagation isn't advancing to the levels anticipated, or you're not achieving it as fast as you'd like, you may be looking at expansion at the Site 4 facility, the Willow Bend facility in terms of the recharge areas and things like that, upgrade to some of the smaller facilities where you might not necessarily be connecting additional properties to them, but you would be looking to get improved nitrogen performance to help reduce their contribution to the load, and working again with Barnstable in their efforts on Pompanesett Bay as well. And then phase 3 is really, as I said before, focusing on the Pompanesett Bay areas. Phase 4, again, depending on shellfish, would be the Hamlin Pond, Yehu Pond focus with additional Pompanesett Bay extensions, and then phase 5 is the balance. The way that the phases were developed, and this is talked about in the report as well, is also a culmination or function of the matrix that we had developed and how we prioritize different areas in terms of when we broke up the planning area into service components. We kind of ranked based on various different criteria how we wanted to how we thought that they might play out. So that's the phasing is also based. It takes that into consideration when it's in outlining when certain areas were targeted. Then in terms of the costs, so what this table represents is the total project build-out capital cost, which is redundant because I have build-out capital cost at build-out, so in case you didn't know it was at build-out. The upper part of the table is really focused on Mashpee, so it breaks it out into the components that are relevant to Mashpee, around a total of what that is under with shellfish, which is the middle column, and without shellfish, which is the very conservative estimate of, if shellfish don't do anything and nothing else, if you have to go to completely hard infrastructure, that's what you'd be looking at on a capital cost. Then the neighboring communities estimate is a combination of what Barnstable, Falmouth, and Sandwich might be looking at. And again, most of those are based on hard infrastructure approaches. Since we're not physically planning for the other communities, and they are all in various different stages of their planning estimates, they might be dealing with those in different mechanisms. So all this is to say that we've taken into consideration that they are going to have to deal with their needs, and they may find other methods that are cost effective for them to deal with it, that may be different than what we're proposing here. And then the total capital cost is listed as at the bottom there. And then just looking at the present worth of the Mashpee component. So this now takes the table that we talked before that has the Mashpee O&M costs, totalizes those for under the compliance with shellfish aquaculture, compliance without shellfish aquaculture, creates a present worth value of the 20-year at 3% back in today's dollars, adds it to the total capital cost from the previous slide to give you a total present worth, so you can compare the two scenarios to each other, and you can see that there's a significant difference between the two approaches. These are built on build-out, and that's another caveat in which when the shellfish program was developed, it's developed based on looking at the TMDL MEP levels of nitrogen. And it's conservative in that it just targets that level. It wasn't built on trying to address some build-out number. So in the report, we talk about how much available either shellfish density or area that's available that we could then expand those areas, increase the shellfish population, and deal with some of the build-out without actually having to go to a hard infrastructure piece. But for the purposes of this document, what we've done is we've assumed that any of that build-out load is really just being dealt with traditional methods. Then what we've done is we've taken the neighboring communities' capital costs, which is first row, their O&M and the present worth of their O&M to get a total present worth of the neighboring communities, the NC, adding it to the present worth that was on the slide that we just talked about to basically give you the bottom line comparison of dealing with it with a shellfish component and without a shellfish component. And again, you can see there's a significant savings in dealing with it with shellfish, and that savings may even be greater if we get increased densities, we get additional denitrification or additional shellfish growth, all kinds of things. If the towns don't reach build out that we've projected, all those different mechanisms, if the fertilizer reductions help, stormwater improvements, and whatever goes on in the other communities, all those things will play a role in the costs. So, where do we go? So, at the point of submittal, which will be this month, I'm just making the final revisions and dealing with editorial changes and typographical changes, and presuming that the commission doesn't have any other additional comments with regards to the reports. We'll submit it to MIPA. We'll notify the Cape Cod Commission as well. They'll receive a copy of it. It'll go through the MIPA review. When MIPA issues their certificate and hopefully with a favorable response like we got the last time, then the town will enter the DRI process, which the Cape Cod Commission has streamlined a bit now that they have a better mechanism in place to deal with these types of large planning projects. But at the same time, the community is going to need to deal with seeking funding for additional studies and field work as requested by the regulators or others, appropriating funds for implementation, starting to think about how you're going to do that, further securing any treatment and recharge locations, which may involve memorandums of understanding, formal memorandums of understanding, ownership transfers, the continued coordination with the surrounding towns. It's a very important part of this whole process. Continued the aquaculture, the shellfish program. Mashpee will be developing some kind of management structure and how they want to do this, whether it's through the district, through the town, through some combination. And then the adaptive management and compliance monitoring, which again is really going to come down to those 5-year periods, seeing how the embayments are responding, using the tools, some of the tools that the Cape Cod Commission's developing now. It'll be very nice if the Cape Cod Commission continues to do the MVP tool and update that data. You'll have more up-to-date data and consumably can use that, and then in combination with the MEP model runs, track performance that way, as well as your shellfish hauls and things like that. So with that, I turn it over to Tom and the committee for questions.
Joe?
Well, it's not so much of a question, but this looks really good to me. I'm proud of it. There is one other thing I'd like to mention, though. after the town meeting the other night, I went home with the annual town report. And on page 143, the story of what has happened with the sewer commission over the last 10 years, what has been the plan and the accomplishments and the benchmarks, was just written, I believe by you, Tom, in a very conversational tone, very easy to understand, without getting into the problem with, like, most of my reports are facts, 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 you know, kind of engineering brain. And there are phrases and paragraphs in that might well fit into that executive summary.
Okay.
Rather than being too hard with the facts. Anybody that wants the facts is going to go through the rest of the pages anyway. But what we are trying to do is communicate the complexity in a simple manner so that people can appreciate not only the plan itself, but understand the concepts behind it. And I think Tom's representation in the annual report was extremely well done. And I'd like to compliment him on that. And I think you should consider taking a look at it before you finalize the executive summary, the page 1.
You can send it over to me and we can
There's probably a
incorporate it.
pile of them out in the hallway there. I think the annual reports are...
Do you have an electronic copy so I don't have to retype the whole thing?
Yes, I do, yes. I had to submit it electronically, so yes, I do.
But I'll get you one tonight before we go
Okay.
anyway.
Perfect.
But otherwise, congratulations. Job well done.
Thank you.
So Jeff, the plan is basically done. There's a few little tweaks you've got to make. The selectmen on Monday took a vote to endorse our submitting of the plan. I think we need 2 votes here at the Sewer Commission. I think the first vote we need to make is to approve the plan. And I'll look for a motion from somebody to approve the plan that's been put together here.
I'll make the motion to approve the plan with any necessary typographical or other non-mechanical adjustments.
A little map change there. Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Okay, any discussion? Right, all those in favor of approving the plan that we've been working on for 15 years, say aye.
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 So that's a roll call. Joe, yes. Tom, yes. Glenn, yes. And the second vote we need is a vote to authorize Jeff to submit the plan. We had some communication about this as to whose name would be on the submission letter, and as we did with the draft plan, Jeff will be signing the letter on behalf of the Sewer Commission. And what we need is a vote to authorize Jeff to submit the plan.
So be it.
Is there a
I'll make
second?
a motion. Oh,
Glenn made the motion.
okay.
Want to second it?
I'll second it.
All right. Any further discussion? Last chance, folks. It's going out the door. All right. I'll call for a vote. All those in favor of authorizing Jeff and GHD to submit the plan through the scary process it's got to go through now, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. So on the roll call, Joe, yes. Tom, yes. Glenn, yes. All right. Jeff, do you see any role at this point for Regina Villa? Anything needs to be done? We have a plan now. I would think that an appropriate task might be to prepare some sort of brochure on what's in the plan to distribute to our taxpayers and voters.
I think that would be wise. Now, I guess the question would be, would you like something that's a 8.5 by 11, just front and back, or
I think something similar to the brochure that we did the first time around.
Which is
right.
basically 4 pages,
Yeah.
front back.
And I don't know if there's budget for it, but the kiosk is getting awful outdated and ratty looking itself. It's when I read over it, it's like, oh yeah, that's what we were doing about 7 years ago. I don't know if that's necessary because nobody ever sees it anyway. It's actually in the back of Town Hall, not the front. So maybe the website is the place to do that along with the brochure. And
We do need to talk about because we are at the edge of our budget.
yeah, let's keep it down then.
Yeah, we'll work with Regina Villa, and what will likely happen is we'll draft something and then have them proof and comment and help us put something together to go out.
Because aren't we still under a need to, for the women and minority?
Yep, and I
Ready to
can't
be spent.
remember where the budget stands. The biggest issue is, printing costs is expensive, so that's where the biggest thing is. Depending on how many, we didn't print very many last time, and I think I produced most of them in-house.
And we still have a bunch of them, so
So I
whatever
guess
that
the
was
question
probably
to
was
you
sufficient
is,
or more than sufficient.
how would you like that to be done? How many would you like? How many are you thinking about? Will also,
Well, how many did you do last time? That's how I'm thinking about it, because we still have some left.
I'm trying to think that we did maybe somewhere between 500 and 1,500, and I don't remember which.
Okay, well, why
I
don't
can
you
look at
just
the
check
transmittal 'cause I transmitted it
back?
to you, so I have a transmittal that says.
Can we do it internally or give it to Staples? If it's an 8.5 by 11 folded in half, 4 pages, that's pretty inexpensive to do.
You'd be surprised that it runs up when you start doing 1,500 of them. Because
Well, let's see what the number was,
So-
and we'll talk about that at a future meeting, I think.
But yes,
Okay. But the distribution primarily will be electronic anyway, waterways, et cetera.
so, and then the other logistical thing that we need to think about is transitioning the web page. Right now, GHD runs it, but at some point, it's really, like, at the end of this, it's really yours. We're supposed to really just turn it over to you. There needs to be some decision on the town side of how they want to take that. Do they want to build their own? Do they want to do something else and just harvest the information out of it? Whatever it is, you paid for it. It's your webpage. We pay, I don't know, like $25 or $75 a year or whatever to keep it, to the webpage live. It's got a lot of good information on it, and then the last update to it will be basically whatever we develop as the flyer is going to be sort of the last update that'll go into, where we talked about the various different pieces. So the final recommended plan page will literally just be all the stuff that we develop as part of this. I'm just going to basically take that, put it in there. That's the most cost-effective way to deal with it. The flyer will be available on the web page. The presentations are there. The reports will be there. But it does it becomes an issue for the town to consider. I think, for an example, the town of Falmouth had their own independent page, and then they ultimately had a mechanism in the town of Falmouth where they took the information that they wanted and they built their own new page through the town of Falmouth. I think that's correct, Lynn, isn't it? I believe that that's what they did. So there may be a want to do that, or there may, yeah. So, but I would like to be able to, turn that over, because we don't have budget to continue to maintain that beyond this. So I do that on my own time just to kind of update it.
Yeah, so I mean, I would think that we'd want you to hang on to it at least until we've got the DRI process done. And then we'll talk to the IT staff in Town Hall to see if we can't just integrate it with the town website somehow.
So, and we can, like I said, we can provide all the files and everything, and they can put it into whatever your form, because every web page is slightly different in terms of how they're built.
Or maybe we just keep it alive and we pay the money and it's just a link from the town webpage. Because it's got its own catchy address, so.
Yeah, so that's a decision that the town needs to make. So,
Yep. The other thing when doing all of this stuff,
Yep.
obviously we've got the election on the 16th. Let's just hold off and see how that goes so we can be a little more specific about who's running what when the brochure comes out. That's just 2 weeks, so we can wait that long.
So we are going to be submitting, well, okay, thank you. As soon as, our AA's back and I can get all the copies physically made,
Mhm.
then we'll send that off. What I will probably do is if.
I'm just talking about the brochure, not the
Yeah,
plan.
no. So I'm just saying in terms of, getting the submittal done and things like that, so.
Okay. All right. Anything else you want to tell us, Jeff?
I don't think I have anything new to.
You have a bill. Do you want us to pay your bill?
That would
How about that?
Great.
We do have a voucher or an invoice from GHD in the amount of $3,419, and I'm going to look for a motion to pay that bill.
I'll make a motion that we pay GHD $3,419.
Second.
Okay. Any discussion? All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
All right. Let's sign that. Intermunicipal negotiations, county-funded intermunicipal MOU negotiations. I think we can scratch that since it's basically died. Whatever happened to that with the county, but I think they've basically subsumed it or I don't know, dropped it in deference to their to-await planning process. So. And regarding the 208 plan, there was a meeting this morning. They keep renting the room for 4 hours, and it was about an hour meeting, basically just generally talking about intermunicipal cooperation. They keep using a watershed that drives me crazy. They're using a watershed to demonstrate 3 town shares of loads, and it's the Childs River watershed, but they're incorporating Johns Pond and the Shumet Pond and Moody Pond and all these areas that the massive amount of the majority of the flow is going to the Municus, Quashnet River, not to the Childs River. So it's driving me crazy they keep using that because we don't have that percentage of the Childs River. That's going to the Quashnet River. So that's got to be resolved at some point. Did you have a conversation with Brian Howes about how that came about, that all of a sudden they're dealing with a Childs River watershed that massively overlaps the Municus Quashnet watershed?
It's not anything new. What it is it's misleading when you look at just that watershed alone without identifying the caveat that the pond flow that comes out of Sandwich travels through Shumet, travels through Johns, and then it splits into those watersheds.
Mm-hmm.
And so only a small percentage goes down to Childs River, and the majority of it, 70 to 80 plus percent, goes into the Quashnet Municus. But the watersheds are actually overlapped. So if you were to put both of them up, you'd see that area north of Shumet and Johns Pond both highlighted for both watersheds. So the watershed delineation is correct. It's just misleading because if you don't know and you can't tell from the numbers whether they've accounted for the pond flow distribution, you can't tell if they're assuming that everything goes down there, which I have a hard time believing that they do, but you can't tell without seeing their numbers.
Seems like a big load from Mashpee in that doesn't seem like it's what's coming out of Mashpee for that Childs River.
The only other thing that happened, and I don't know, Ed Eichner had mentioned that there was a change south of Johns Pond,
little area,
where the neighborhood, in a real simplistic form, the watershed line used to curve to the west, and now it curves to the east. And so a neighborhood that was in the Quashnet River kind of flip-flopped and ended up in the Childs River.
Mm-hmm.
But that's really the only area where the watershed line actually changed. And I think I sent you a figure which kind of showed that neighborhood.
Yeah.
So
it's just scary that they use that as a basis for intermunicipal shares. They better be getting the numbers right and recognize that. All right. Any case, so they're just moving along. Their next meeting in June, they will designate wastewater treatment management agencies, which are abbreviated as WMAs for some reason. And the intention is to designate the 15 towns as the WMAs. Doesn't mean that the water district, the water sewer district, doesn't makes sense because the water and sewer district just, you do an intermunicipal agreement with the town, you be the utility that does the utility part of it. But the responsibility is always going to lie with the towns for meeting the targets. Anything going on, Win, in Falmouth? Anything new on this Moonicus River study? You got to use the mic, though.
Winthrop Monroe from Water Quality Management Committee in Falmouth. I had hoped that we'd have a meeting this afternoon, but we didn't because Sia is away, can't be there, and we don't have enough other things going on. So our next meeting will be on the 21st. We have looked at funding possibilities, and there's nothing new to report on it.
Okay.
At this point. I have one question I'd like to ask connected with
Sure.
this, what you just said a minute ago. From what you just said, a part of the cost of doing a part of the mitigation which has to be done in the Childs River watershed is already included in your plan, but not the rest of it. In other words,
Well, the
anything
Mashpee part is.
the Mashpee, yeah,
Right.
the Mashpee part is included, but not all of the Mashpee part. Presumably, the part of the Mashpee.
Well, no, the entire town of Mashpee is included in the plan.
Is it?
Yes, along with all of the sandwich stuff that is included in that Charles River thing, except we're taking it as part of the Quashnet-Moonicus watershed.
Maybe I didn't look at the map carefully enough, but it looks to me as if the Childs River. So only Falmouth part of the Childs River is
Not
excluded from
in our plan, yeah.
And all of Mashpee is included in your plan, including
Yes.
the Childs River watershed.
Yes. I mean, it's in a late phase. I think it's phase 4 or 5, but
Okay.
it's there.
And so our discussions presumably would be about how people were going to handle that part of how you were going to handle the Childs River watershed.
Right. Well, I mean, part of the discussion involves this overlap.
Yes.
Like, a lot of our facilities are going into the Johns Pond or Shumat Pond area, and in effect, if part of that load is going to the Childs River, we may have already maybe even more than over-mitigated for the Childs River. We'll see, because our big nut was the Quashnet River being so difficult to meet the target at it that we basically have to sewer that whole area, ultimately, because there's no shellfish mitigation. We're hoping that the flushing study shows that we can get some benefit out of improving flushing in the bay and cut down the number, but as far as Mashpee goes, we've planned, even in phase 2 of the plan, we probably more than need our share of that watershed.
I have lots of questions, but I think they're almost all premature at this point because Falmouth and Mashpee and Sandwich have not gotten together to discuss the way in which they're going to operate this whole thing. And in Falmouth, apparently it has not even been decided who is going to be the people who are going to be actually dealing with this, whether the Water Quality Management Committee will do it or whether the selectmen will appoint some other group to deal with it. We don't know that yet.
We have a similar situation, different but similar situation here with the Water Sewer District, whether it's going to be an entity involved in the process or not. At this point, the Sewer Commission is we have a formal statutory sewer commission, with the power to lay pipes and all of that stuff.
Right.
We haven't done that yet, but, whether or not the selectmen decide they want to change that, we don't know.
Mm-hmm.
But at this point, I don't know how the rest of the members feel, but I'm encouraging people to vote yes on question 8, so we have a water and sewer district to run the utility part of it, and then town can take care of the shellfish in grand fashion with Rick York here.
And that will go down next week.
The 16th.
On the 16th.
Yeah, we'll see what happens.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I state my own personal opinion that I hope we can get together and start talking this summer about what we're going to be
Obviously,
doing.
we've been talking for years with your committee, and with particularly Jerry has come to a lot of our meetings.
Right.
So we've got a long-standing relationship with you guys. The only difference now is there's this Cape Cod Commission sort of imposed 208 WMA that's got to be created that everybody on the Cape's got to deal with now, and puts a different twist on what we're doing.
And by the way, I came here at the specific request of Matt Patrick because he couldn't be here tonight.
Right.
I plan to come when I can, but he's the one who is really would like to be here and be a regular part of the discussions.
I got his email, so
He couldn't be here tonight, so he asked me to come.
great. Well, thanks for coming, Win. All right, obviously nobody here from Barnstable or Sandwich. Other items, water and sewer, just again, I'll just repeat. I don't know, the Sewer Commission has never taken a position on the water and sewer district, Joe. Do you want to take a position on question 8?
That might be a good idea.
What might our position be?
Tom has heard this before. He's teasing me. The town has absolutely no facility to lay pipe, do competitive bidding in the construction phase, and the other things that have to be implemented professionally to get any infrastructure off the ground. There has been some discussion between myself and a number of the selectmen, 3 as a matter of fact, that they were in a state of confusion when they decided to say don't vote for it because someone had ramrodded something through that they didn't truly understand. So I think it's an open issue, and I'd like to make the motion that the Sewer Commission supports the concept of the water sewer district being the mechanic and implementing the hard structure required in our plan. Does
that mean we support question 8?
Is that sufficient?
That's sufficient, sure. I think that implies that we support question 8, because that's what it's all about.
Yeah, say
I don't know. Is there a second?
specifically in that sentence that it supports number 8. Now,
How do you feel, Glenn?
what format is this going to be? Are you going to write a letter to the
No.
selectmen?
We'll just take a vote in the minutes.
I'd like to see
Going
it
out to
in the
TV.
form, part of my motion, that a letter is addressed to the selectmen, signed by the chairman of the Sewer Commission, that this is our position.
Okay.
And if the vote's unanimous, make it a unanimous position. I don't know the others.
Well, I definitely agree with Joe. I'll second it, first of all, and kind of put in my own 2 cents here or whatever. Having worked in a municipality and really not worked in the sewer business, but in the trash business, so to speak, it makes a lot of sense what Joe's saying. The water commission's already, the water district is already putting pipes on the ground. They've got an infrastructure in place. It'll be really easy to just to merge right into it and move forward. A lot of towns I know of, and Jeff, you can correct me if I'm wrong, don't run their own facilities per se. They either have a private company, and definitely it's an enterprise account. Nothing comes out of it. There's no, money coming out of the coffers, so to speak, or whatever. It's all either, it's, like I said, it's an enterprise account. It's all by assessment and everything else. So I think it only makes sense to have that, the district, and to keep it out of the town's hands, because eventually that's the way it's going to move anyways. That's the only way it works, and it just makes more sense, and it's a lot less complicated. When because we all know how, when it gets to be political, how complicated things can be, and it's a lot better to have it being run by somewhat of a private entity, and done. So I definitely agree with it, and I agree with the letter and everything.
So you're seconding the motion, are you?
Yeah, I said it second in the beginning.
All right. That's right, you did. All right, I'll just add that, the main reason that I've been talking about doing the water and sewer district all along is the fact that they have the management and administrative people in place that would have to be duplicated by the town, and there's a cost savings there that I estimated years ago at over $500,000 a year. So, this just makes sense to save money and not duplicate things. So That's why I've been working on it all these years. Any case, I have a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion?
Yes, will you write that letter to the selectmen?
Can you write it for me? I'll sign it. Whatever, it's going to be a very brief one. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, that's unanimous. All right. We now officially support the Water and Sewer District. Any other issues anyone who wants to talk about? All right, well, Shelley, your plant's working fine?
Yes, it's working fine. It's
Okay.
17 years old, and I imagine one of our concerns is if the plan proposes a takeover of the plant, either to and/or expansion of the plant.
You're going to have to use the mic. Sorry.
Name and what you're representing.
You just pull it out.
It's okay.
Yeah.
Sheldon Gilbert, I've been appointed as a member of an advisory committee to the commission by the selectmen for Precinct 4. To my knowledge, no other selections of other precincts have been made.
Well, there were, but they're all moved out of town and that sort of thing, so.
Well, okay, I'm not moving yet. The point that you made in the motion was that the capability of the district is very critical to our town managing this, and the second point was that it gets us away from the politics of the what might be actions by the Board of Selectmen, and that makes a great deal of sense. One of the things I found missing, and I don't know if it's deliberate or if it's something at a later stage, is what this would wind up in terms of taxing over time for the whole program. And in other words, the first thing I heard was that it'll be treated as a straight tax rather than a betterment plus a tax for the people who are getting the services. So it's the fairest way because the whole town benefits from the implementation of the
And the
program.
whole town is causing the problem, so,
Yeah.
yes, and only a
So
portion will
that
be on the
makes a lot of
sewer.
sense. I don't know if that's a decision that's yet to be made.
Officially, it's a decision, of course, that's yet to be made by whoever's in charge. That's certainly been my feeling, both on the Water District and here at the Sewer Commission, that ought to be on the tax base as the first way to go, and I've said it over and over again for years and years. Because, you can see the plan. I mean, Jeff didn't exactly say it, but if things work out, we never get to Phase 5 or even Phase 4. That means a lot of the town is still on their septic systems, and only a portion of the town is actually on a sewer. And to charge them
every
betterments
toilet
to
in
do
town contributes to
Right,
the
right.
nitrogen problem.
that.
That's
What I was
67%
getting
of them, I
at, Joe, though, is
understand.
that to lay the burden of the fixing the problem only on those that happen to be the ones that get tied into the sewer is not fair. And that,
Right, well, I think
that's
we're
why
all
the
agreeing.
tax
I
base
just
makes
wanted to
sense,
raise
yeah.
it again to show my understanding of what has been said already.
yeah.
The other part of that is how you communicate that, and that you can't do it now because it's not a final decision. But I think it's a question that'll arise with the residents. Is how does this get done? It's a long program, and it's not going to be all at once. So whether you do it now or later at some point, I think it's important because that's what individuals may begin to ask.
Yeah, when people ask me, I tell them that's my position, and
Okay, that's my only comment for the current times.
that's all I can say.
I have a lot to learn.
All right.
Thank
Thanks. Thanks, Shelley. All right. Did we take a vote? Yes, we did. Did we take a vote? We did. Okay, that's right. Any other business? There's no correspondence. I gave you a copy of the summary that Jeff prepared for the selectmen on the changes in the plan. Worked out pretty well on Monday night. And I did notice there's a special selectmen's meeting next Wednesday morning at 10 o'clock. One of the items on the agenda is the Water and Sewer District ballot question. So we'll see what happens there. Any case, on that note, I'll look for a motion to adjourn.
I make a motion to adjourn?
Second,
All those in favor? Aye.
when is the meeting?
Next Wednesday.
Wednesday at 10?
The 13th at 10 a.m.
Yeah, before the
Is there any-
election.
Is there any date for the next meeting?